I'm Jonathan Larson with TYTI Investigates, and New Hampshire Democrats today are going to the polls in the nation's second primary of the Democratic presidential race in 2020. And if you've come here looking to find out who's going to win, the answer is, I don't know. I'm kidding. The answer is a Democrat. I'm kidding. Maybe Bernie Sanders, maybe Michael Bloomberg, which gets me back to my original answer, I don't know. And more to the point, stop looking, okay? And the reason I say that is I understand you want to know, and I understand it feels satisfying to look at tea leaves and polls and all that, and to listen to prognosticators prognosticate on TV and have a sense of, oh, this is going to happen, oh, that is going to happen. What we do when we tune into that media is we reward it. And what that does is it disincentivizes good journalism and good commentary, some of which I hope to achieve right now before your eyes. This morning, Dave Weigel, Washington Post, puts out his today's edition of the trailer. The headline reads, Sanders may be on the verge of another New Hampshire win. Democrats aren't ready to get behind him. And that's okay. They're not supposed to, right? They're not supposed to. What I wanted to talk about here today was the sort of the onus, the burden that's being put on Sanders. Can he unify the party? No one ever asked, can Trump unify the party? It was basically, if you like what I'm doing, get behind me. If not, hit the highway, right? No candidate has to unify anyone. If you think that if Bernie Sanders is the general nominee, is the general election candidate, and you think he's better than Donald Trump, then do everything you can to elect him. Same thing if it's Pete Buttigieg, same thing if it's Mike Bloomberg, same thing if it's Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar, or even Joe Biden. It could happen. So I wanted to bounce a few things off of you that are sort of in the zeitgeist right now as the party elders. And by, when I talk about the Democratic Party establishment, of course, what I mean are also Republican never-Trumpers who, for some reason, now get to weigh in on the fate of the party as if they're more appropriate to judge the suitability of Bernie Sanders as a Democrat, right? Everyone's like, oh, no, he's not even a Democrat. And then now let's go to Rick Wilson to talk about that. Rick Wilson being, a McCain guy. So Weigel points out that Sanders won New Hampshire before, back in 2016, by a 21-point landslide. And obviously, to some extent, he's going to get compared to that. And Faz Shakir, the campaign manager, points out later on, it's a much more splintered field. So it's obviously very different. But with very few people even having a chance of beating him, Pete Buttigieg being the notable exception, Weigel writes, unlikely to beat him here, rival candidates and skeptical voters are still asking whether Sanders and his movement could be trusted to win a general election. And of course, he does quite well in the polls in the hypothetical matchups against Trump. There's virtually no candidate that consistently does better. Maybe Bloomberg, maybe Biden. Then they quote a New Hampshire resident saying, quote, Sanders is probably too progressive for me, said Jacob Kirk, 59, who said he had voted for Sanders in the 2016 primary, and then in the general cast another anybody but Hillary vote for Donald Trump. And there's a lot to unpack there. One is, when we talk about a candidate being too progressive, if you like him otherwise and you think that the things he or she are trying to achieve are positive things, but you think they're too progressive or too X to get it passed, that's a good reason to vote for them, especially if you don't like their extremes, right? They're not king. We have not gotten to that point just yet. Any candidate is going to be restrained to some extent by the political realities on the ground once they get in office. Some people even voted for Trump for precisely that reason. They liked the guy, they thought he would stir things up, but they expected that Congress, haha, suckers, would provide a curbing influence. Excuse me. Now, the other side of that is this. If you think he's too progressive, maybe you're right, but maybe, just maybe, he does, or she, end up taking the entire country with them, right? If we judge people, and obviously this person literally thought that Bernie Sanders was too progressive for him, but some people, when they say that, they mean he's too progressive to win or to accomplish anything once he gets elected. Well, if that's the concern, then do something about it, right? That's on us now more than it is on Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg or Elizabeth Warren. And the other thing I would say is the fact that Jacob Kirk, 59, voted for Sanders in the primary in 2016 and then voted for anybody but Hillary is used as a knock on Sanders. In the meantime, however, Pete Buttigieg is praised for his ability to appeal to independents, to Republicans who are looking for a never-Trump alternative. Pete Buttigieg should not be beat up for that, and neither should Bernie Sanders. This notion that look, I get the concern, and I don't want to be insensitive or deaf to it, but the concern is that appealing in any way, overtly or even implicitly, to a Trump voter is seen as accepting or embracing or at a minimum tolerating racism, misogyny, xenophobia, hatred, cruelty, lawlessness, you name it. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe bringing them into the party is a gateway drug to rejecting hate. Maybe it's not about you accepting hate. Maybe it's about you bringing people into a movement that makes it okay for them to reject hate, that gives them something else, that lets them embrace those things without having to feel apologetic about it in the way that Democrats so often are about, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to try this just because I'm sorry we have to raise your taxes, but we want people not to die. Sorry. If you are proud about it, that lets more people get on board. And if they are willing to get on board, again, there are very few people out there who are monolithic, set in stone in their beliefs. A lot of people changed. You probably have people in your lives who you saw change in front of your eyes by the fact that they adhered to Trump, right? It's not that people have massively worked out, taxonomies of their own personal ideology and then automatically just pick the candidate who's closest to it. It's very often the opposite. I like the cut of that guy's jib. Or in the Democratic Party's case, the cut of that woman's jib. And they say X, and so now I'm inclined to believe X, right? That there's accepting people into the party, deplorables and otherwise, is perhaps the first step to converting and maybe even redeeming them. Weigel writes, if there's any Stop Sanders plan, it is likely to target the senator's supporters and question whether they could unify the Democrats in time to win an election. And again, if party leaders are worried about Sanders' ability to win a general election, or Elizabeth Warren's, or Pete Buttigieg's for that matter, then do something about it. You're the party leaders, lead. And Dave talks about an interesting line of approach that Cynthia Nixon brought out at a Sanders rally. It says, the campaign brought out actress Cynthia Nixon, a new endorser who had backed Hillary Clinton in 2016, to tell her own conversion story without attacking any particular rival. Conversion meaning from being a Hillary Clinton supporter to a Sanders supporter. It was a mistake, she said, to back away from a candidate you could get excited about and go for a candidate you could imagine someone who disagreed with you voting for. Quote, that's a mirage in the desert, Nixon said. Quote, you found somebody who everybody is going to go for, and what you're putting forward is somebody who nobody's going to bother to turn out for. And one of the most heartbreaking things I think about watching the primary season unfold is so many people internalizing punditry and saying, I'm not going to support who I want. I'm so afraid, I'm so traumatized, I'm so beaten down, I'm so scared, I'm so despairing for the future of my country that I'm willing to pre-concede to pre-compromise. And yes, okay, you tell me that person's electable, I'm on board, whatever it takes. Please just, release my child unharmed. That step's later. That's not now. And we'll never find out who really is the most electable candidate if we all embrace and nurture and cultivate that inner pundit. Pundits are horrible. It's a horrible profession. It's a horrible undertaking to predict the future. I mean, there are a lot of bad things about the Salem witch trials, clearly. But it's not an unhealthy thing to point out, no. Shut up. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. Stop acting like you do. And every single one of the pundits that gets paid, 7 figures to punditize, they've got massive blind spots that they have totally fallen into in the past and been wrong multiple times. And I literally had an entire second article from Politico on all of this that I was going to do the same spiel on, because it touches on the same points, but in some other ways. But well, maybe one. There was one. Oh man. Okay. They're talking to someone from Third Way who says, we don't see a path for Sanders to win the election. That's fine. That's fine. The fact that you can't see it is why the party is in trouble, right? The fact that it's been there for decades and you haven't seen it is the entire point. Carville says, if the Democratic Party doesn't come together, we're going to lose the country. Anti-Trump Republican strategist. Notice, not pro-democratic Republican strategist. Not actually going to endorse a Democrat in 2020. Rick Wilson says, quote, there's a 65% chance Trump's going to win again. And if it's Bernie, there's an 85% chance Trump's going to win again. 65% chance, 85% chance. How do you know? Like, I realize that your Republican Party back in 2000, they decided we make a reality now. You can look it up. This is a thing that they actually said. But the hubris of saying that the percentage chance in January of how the general election is going to play out in November. You don't know any of the October surprises that are going to happen. You don't know any of the foreign policy snafus that we're going to fall into, the military horrors that might happen between now and then, one country invading another, an attack on U.S. forces, an embassy being blown up. There's literally 1 million things that could possibly happen, and there's a 100% chance that something will. But here's Rick Wilson. He can tell you to the percentile what the chances are. It's insanity. It's infantile and it's insanity. And for us to give it any truck whatsoever, that's mob insanity. Whether it's watching the horrors of punditry on TV or whatever it is. And he then says he will effing destroy, this is Rick Wilson talking about Sanders, he will effing destroy the Democratic Party. This is a party that has one out-and-out hero to the masses, Barack Obama. You can throw in Michelle Obama as well, but I'm talking about actual career politicians. Who does the Democratic Party have other than that? We've got Bill Clinton, probably the most popular, right? But still, a little bit of a punchline, right? And we've got some other punchlines as well. Al Gore, punchline. John Kerry, punchline. Howard Dean, punchline. These were all people who were at the top of the party, and they ended up losing in a way, whether it was flip-flopping, being apologetic, being inauthentic, whatever it was, they all ended up punchlines. And you're worried about the one guy among those people who has been consistent for decades, is unapologetic to a fault, and I do think he's screwed up on more than one occasion when he should have said, you know what, I've been wrong there, Thanks for showing me the way. But you can't say that Bernie Sanders is overly apologetic. So that's the guy that this Republican strategist says will effing destroy the Democratic Party. And the line I had about all of these people who don't see a path is that they all made careers out of triangulating most Americans out of politics entirely. Why do you think people say, oh, I don't watch politics, I don't get involved? Why do you think that? Because of Third Way and Rick Wilson and James Carville. They turn it into a game. They disconnect it from people's lives. And in terms of the one guy who's again, besides Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, right? What did Bill Clinton give us, right? This is James Carville's sparkling example of what the Democratic Party needs, obviously. Carville says, Bernie Sanders, having him for president of the United States? Are you effing kidding me? This is the guy who gave us Bill Clinton, who in turn gave us the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which gave us $4 a gallon gas. Graham Leach Bliley signed that into law, which gave us the economic crash, the global economic crash of 2008, gave us welfare reform, tossing people off welfare rolls, gave us overly punitive criminal legislation, the war on drugs, all of that stuff, incarceration. That was all Bill Clinton. What exactly what exactly could be worse than that? And you're telling us, are you effing kidding me? There was one other point I wanted to make about Pete Buttigieg, lest this look like a Bernie Sanders endorsement. Pete Buttigieg, obviously the other front runner at the moment in New Hampshire. And here's what I would say. When I first started reporting on Pete Buttigieg, my impression of him back in March last year was that this was a pretty progressive guy with pretty progressive policies. And I realized for various reasons, substantive and otherwise, he has said something about bringing down the deficit, which is, I think, a classic Carville move and not progressive whatsoever. Not that bringing down the deficit is automatically bad, but it's typically a tool for making sure that progressive stuff doesn't happen. But regardless of that, if you think that Buttigieg triangulated to the center in order to take out Biden so that Buttigieg, could go head-to-head with Sanders, what you're saying is you think Buttigieg will move for political reasons. That's good. That's a good thing. Because what that means is if he does end up head-to-head with Sanders, great, then move Buttigieg back to the left if that's where you want him, right? Reward him for when he does go left. That's what you want from politicians, right? They can either be exactly right and purely, authentically exactly where you are, or they can be responsive to you. I think most people want their politicians to be responsive. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If they realize, oh wow, people really do want this, maybe I can give it to them, that's not a bad thing. So I would say keep that in mind for all of these folks. The primaries are not the time to unify. The primaries are the exact opposite. They're the time to fight and to clash and to compare and contrast. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. So if it seems like Bernie Sanders can't unify the Democratic Party right now, he's not trying to unify the Democratic Party right now. He's trying to defeat it, right? So is everyone else, right? That's the point of a primary. So it's sort of facile to even be asking the question at this point. And the people who are asking whether he can do it or anyone can do it after the primary, those are called pundits. And they're wrong and they're bad. Okay, let's see what you folks have to say. So pardon me for looking down. I'm reading what you have to say. Okay, DLJ says, good morning all, it's good to be back. I've been starved of my TYTI fix. Well, bon appetit, DLJ. Let's see what else we've got here. DLJ says, to answer the titular question, can Democrats let Bernie unify them? Yes, is DLJ's answers. Will they? No. Yosef Kitwana says the DNC, in other words, will the DNC let Bernie unify them? No. The everyday voter, definitely. And that's the other thing, like the DNC, all those folks, if enough people get on board, people's complaints about the DNC is that they're too wishy-washy, they're too apologetic. So if that's the case, if they're wishy-washy, they'll follow along with the popular movement, right? That's the whole complaint. What principle are they going to stand on? Let's see. Curious Cleo says, hit the likes, please. Techno Estate says, like hit. Thank you very much for the likes. I very much appreciate it, both for the personal affirmation that I take from it and also for juking the algorithm. Thank you. So more folks can see our content. I appreciate that always. Dornaire says, probably not Biden. I just saw a story that he's not even hanging out in New Hampshire for the election. And of course, Biden's best gambit at this point is to lower expectations, I think. A Sear, that's A space CYR, says, I don't trust the Bernie bros. Well, I don't trust the Bernie bros either, mostly because I don't know all the Bernie bros. Are some of them POSs? I'm absolutely sure. I'm sure there are POSs in every camp. But the good news is the Bernie bros aren't running for office, or at least most of them are not. Bernie Sanders is. And the other thing is, it doesn't make sense to trust any candidate, not because politicians are all untrustworthy, because people are. People let other people down all the time. It's a fact of life. It doesn't mean that they're evil or corrupt. It means we're imperfect and we don't necessarily know what other people are expecting from us. It just happens. So the point of American representational politics should not be put someone in office and then trust them. The point is you put someone in office. Let me use this analogy. You're a boss at your place of employment. You hire someone and then you don't leave them alone for 4 years. You're still supposed to supervise their work, check in with them, give them what they need, give them feedback, give them guidance. That's what our politicians are supposed to be getting from us. We're the bosses, and yet we walk away for 4 years at a time. We have to start seeing it as, okay, you're hired. Now let's get to work. Imperator 1 says, Warren was a Republican, Bloomberg and Pete mingled with the Tea Party, and Bloomberg is effectively a Republican, so what does a traditional Democrat even mean? Touché. A. Sears says, I've been called worse names by Bernie bros that I can look up the definition than Trump supporters. Well, I'm sorry anyone called you names. No one should call you names. But again, that's not a reflection on what Bernie is or does, unless he's out there telling them call names. And by the way, Trump is out there saying beat people up in my name, right? So these are two different people. And the other point I've made before is that I think one reason Sanders supporters tend to be more vociferous, sometimes are more venomous. I haven't quantified it, so I don't want to say more or less than anyone else. But if we see that from Sanders supporters, I think Sanders supporters, more than others, have a higher sense of stakes, whether it's personally for them or for, the planet. And that's an extreme emotion, and that can lead to extreme behavior. Doesn't excuse it, but I think that's an alternate explanation for why Bernie bro behavior might be stinky, as opposed to Bernie is secretly telling them, go out and be terrible human beings. Jessica says, I think many are concerned with healthcare, and Sanders is the only one willing to fight for it. He's the only candidate I trust. Yosef Kitwana says, I traditionally think of FDR when it comes to Democrats. It's amazing that people don't remember. Someone was talking about, in one of these articles, was talking about, Americans will never, this was good. Politico asks rhetorically about the Bernie movement, how did this happen? And then says, Some point to the 30 and under crowd, which doesn't remember the Soviet Union, or is simply strapped by stagnant pay or student loan debt, and thinks socialism sounds not so bad. Here's the other thing about socialism. It's not just that the Soviet Union has gone away, right? My view, I'm old enough to remember the Soviet Union. I went to the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. My view of socialism was not formed by the Soviet Union. I wasn't a participant in the economy of it. I didn't have to forge a career within that particular specific form of socialism. I had also traveled to Europe, right? People see it in reality. But here's the other experience that Americans who have never left America have had with socialism. If you listened to Republicans, some Republicans, not all, socialism has been the bedrock of America since the 1930s. When FDR implemented his various New Deal social safety net programs, that was called socialism at the time. When we got Medicaid and Medicare, those were called socialism. If people under 30 are inured to socialism as a threat, maybe it's because people over 30 know that this word gets tossed around as if it means something, and so far it hasn't. We have that track record already of people warning us about the dangers of socialism. If we do X, then we do X, and things are better. Right? That was one reason they didn't want Obamacare. They didn't want people to get used to the idea that maybe you didn't have to go bankrupt in order not to die. Let's see. A. Sear says Bernie can't accomplish what he's promising if he doesn't have a Senate and a Congress. No president is going to, right? That's not the point. The point is, are they headed in the right direction, right? If you like the direction they're going, obviously, Congress is going to be a check. And in some cases, maybe Congress will want them to go further or in a different direction. But if you like that direction, the fact that someone else is going to try to curb that shouldn't be a reason not to vote for them. Why bake in the compromise before you have to? The more support Bernie Sanders gets, or any Democratic candidate, the more effective they can be politically. So if people reject them because they don't think they'll have a lot of political support, that's political suicide, not by the candidate, by the voter. A. Sear says, Bernie supporters don't appear to understand Bernie can't wave his magic wand. I get what you're saying, but again, I think that I don't get why we're so certain, right? I don't remember whether Rick Wilson would tell us we're 65% certain or 85% certain. We're so certain that in a general election, with Democrats across the spectrum backing, including, right, Bloomberg has said, including Bloomberg with his millions, that all of those people, in all their different ways, in all their different voices, to all their different platforms, if they all get behind Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders gets up there and says, not me, us, we have work to do. We all have to roll up our sleeves to make sure that all of us are better, and we are all called to rise to this occasion to better our nation and be unapologetic about it and be proud to be a part of something, rather than after 9/11, Bush's call to the nation being go out and go shopping. But to see it as an actually participatory democracy, why is anyone certain that that can't generate an actual real movement? I don't understand it. People are movable. We see it all the time in our history. That's all our history is people moving. Curious Cleo says, let's let JL explain how Sanders can do it. Everyone be nice. So thank you, Curious Cleo. I don't know how sarcastic you're being, and some of that sarcasm is probably merited. But I think my bigger point is not necessarily that Sanders can engineer party unification, let alone national unification. It's more that it's not his job, right? Assuming he's the nominee, assuming any of them are the nominee, it's not their job to unify. That's this sort of paternalistic view of the presidency that, okay, now you have to make us be a certain way as a country. That's our choice to make, right? And obviously they're the touchstone, they're the sand in the oyster, if you will, whichever analogy you want to use, but we have to make that happen. Chaz Scott says Trump is breaking his political shackles. He's finally understanding the power he has. Bernie doesn't have to be constrained by the political shackles. He too can break them in a good way. So that's certainly a dynamic that's out there, Chaz. I have mixed feelings about that because I do think that Democrats own a lot of the problems we have precisely because they've been so willing to oversee the erosion of the state of checks and balances that we are supposed to have. That is not a limit on us being able to do things. It is the engine by which we do things. The things we do, when we do them without checks and balances, tend to be bad things. If you go back and look at, I was talking about, I think, Graham Leach Bliley or the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. These are financial deregulation. You had members of Congress. I still remember there's a clip of Dick Durbin in the late 90s talking about how in 10 years we're going to be here looking at what a massive failure and mistake this was. And he was off by, I think, 1 year. And if Congress had exerted more of its check and balance obligations at the time, maybe that wouldn't have happened. You know, most of our bad things happen when we're given unrestrained power. And the fact that you can get positive things out of unrestrained executive power is a good rationale for doing it, but it's also a shortcut, and it leaves behind the kind of national will and national investment in what's being done, I think. Now, it's a fair argument to say that FDR did a lot of this stuff unilaterally, very heavy-handed, and he left behind at least 2 or 3 generations who were very much invested in what he had done. But maybe not. Maybe it would have been an even stronger, more lasting commitment to those kinds of ideals, the 4 freedoms and everything else. I'm going to stop talking now. I see you guys. Oh man, we got a super chat here from Per in Sweden, in Swedish kroners, if you're seeing the currency. Per says, man, you are so zen, and I agree, but skepticism must always prevail. I agree. I'm a big fan of skepticism. The problem I see with skepticism is that it tends to be unilaterally wielded. In other words, people hear X on Fox News, and their idea of skepticism is that must not be true. That's just reverse gullibilism. That's not skepticism. Skepticism is saying, I wonder whether that's true. I don't believe it, but I don't believe yet the opposite either. I'm going to find out. But thank you for the super chat, Per. Thank you very much. Tack så mycket. That's Swedish. In fact, it's my only Swedish. Let's see. Okay. I am getting sick, so I apologize in advance if I bail on you guys tomorrow. Per Dalston, another super chat. Thank you, Per. And asking what time the New Hampshire vote begins. Well, it's already underway. It's already begun. I think they already have, you know, the cliche. They've got the Dixville Notch votes in and all that stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodbye up here. and hopefully I'll be well enough and I'll have the fortitude to show up tomorrow and see you guys again so we don't starve DLJ of the TYTI fix. And in the meantime, do not obsess over New Hampshire. Do not reward media that just feels like it's feeding you information about what's going to happen. Go somewhere else. Do something else. I hear Birds of Prey is good. There's, movies that need to be seen. There's a ton of Oscar nominees that I haven't seen yet. So, engage in life, or, start working politically for the next primary or the next caucus, whatever it might be. Nevada, South Carolina, whichever one you want to volunteer for whichever candidate. But as always, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and assume that I'm not coming down with the coronavirus, which is what I'm going to do. And I'll see you soon. Bye.